A good video game should have a name that is unique, iconic, and helps players to easily identify it. Sometimes, though, video game companies decide to be very unhelpful and name two entirely different products the exact same thing, leaving us in a thoroughly unavoidable state of confusion. Sometimes this is understandable. Take two Batman games from the 80s. One 1986 game called Batman looks and plays totally differently from a 1989 game that was called Batman. Both games are similar in the sense they both have the Caped Crusader in them, but they're very different experiences otherwise. It's sort of like mixing up Adam West's Batman with The Dark Knight. Now, that's a cast swap I'd love to see. Either way though, it's understandable how and why that's happened. Games based on famous characters or films will have to use that name to sell copies, and we'll all just have to live with that. The real problem is when developers are able to choose any name they want, and they decide to go with one that's already been used. Sometimes they've even used it themselves. We're looking at 10 examples of that today, and you're going to want to have some Pepto-Bismol on hand because your head is about to be spinning. I'm Peter from TripleJump, which you hopefully won't confuse with any of the other Peters out there, and here are 10 times completely different video games had the same names. Number 10. Bionic Commando, 1987 and 2009. Released in arcades in 1987, Capcom's Bionic Commando tells the story of Lad, a soldier who can't jump for some reason, and so he has to use a grappling hook stored in his bionic arm. Now that's what I call handy. Or army. Oh, army, like a soldier. I get it now. Solid pun, Capcom. That was intentional, right? With the exception of an NES port in 1988 and a Game Boy port in 1992, the series lay dormant for 2 decades until a remake was released in 2009 under the name Bionic Commando Re-Armed. That pun, at least I know, was intentional. The success of Re-Armed led to a sequel being released the very next year, simply called Bionic Commando, but it bore very few similarities to its namesake. While the original Bionic Commando was a side-scrolling platformer, the newer version was an action-adventure shooter. If that weren't a big enough difference, the 2009 protagonist, who at some point had changed his name to Nathan Spencer, could actually jump. Now that is a total betrayal of the original game's USP. Man, what an underhanded development. Underhanded. Oh, what? Capcom gets to make all these puns, but I don't? Such a double standard around here, jeez. Number 9. Burnout, 1998 and 2001. The Burnout series as we know it is famous for over-the-top arcade-style driving with high speeds, big crashes, and a total disregard for the highway code. The first game in the series released in 2001 and introduced many popular gameplay mechanics, including rewards for dangerous driving and a boost meter that could turn an already nail-biting drive into a full-on pants ruiner. It's possible, though, that developer Criterion Games might have had their own pants ruined when they discovered that another racing game called Burnout had been released 3 years earlier. Burnout Championship Drag Racing, which was more commonly known as just Burnout, is, as you might expect, a PC drag racing simulator, which sadly doesn't mean that it's a kart racing game starring RuPaul and chums. One day, hopefully. The game was praised for its sound design, graphics, and customization options, but unfortunately, due to the nature of the sport, the gameplay lasts about as long as it's taken for me to read this sentence. Whilst the 1998 Burnout game wasn't nearly as successful as the one that was released in 2001, it was still praised at the time by both critics and fans. Also, it was developed by Bethesda, so expect a drag racing feature to be added to Fallout 76 any day now. We all know there's nothing more they love to do than keep their old games alive somehow. Number 8. WWF Raw, 1994 and 2002. Despite sounding like a naughty video, WWE's flagship show, Monday Night Raw, has featured some of the most exciting and memorable moments in pro wrestling history. That alone explains why the show has had 2 different video games named after it. The first one was released in 1994 and was an arcade-style fighting game available on SNES, Mega Drive, 32X, Game Gear, Game Boy, and SodaStream. Okay, that last one was a lie, but you get the point. Raw 94, which is too fun not to say, introduced many features that are standard in WWE games to this day, including separate movesets for each character and finishers that were called Mega Moves, because this was the mid-90s. Raw 02, which isn't nearly as much fun to say, brought gamers a bigger roster, updated graphics, and the ability to move in more than two directions. Sadly though, it also brought players bad animation, idiotic AI, and an all-round horrible experience if they chose to play the game on PC. Still, it does hold the distinction of being the final game released under the name WWF before the company became known as WWE. Bloody pandas, ruining all the fun. Number 7. Dante's Inferno, 1986 and 2010. Technically, both of these games are ripping off the epic poem The Divine Comedy, but considering its author has been dead since 1321, we're pretty sure they're safe from any legal action. The more famous video game, called Dante's Inferno, is Visceral Games' 2010 scythe-swinging action-adventure published by EA. The game tells the story of Dante venturing into hell to rescue the soul of his murdered fiancée. Hell, you say? Well, Dante must have passed EA's offices on the way down. Heyo! 24 years earlier, though, another game called Dante's Inferno was available for the Commodore 64. Developed by Denton Designs, the team behind PC and Game Boy versions of Krusty's Funhouse, this game still features the character of Dante, but presents his adventure from a top-down perspective. It's a hard game to track down, with its only major internet presence being on the Italian Wikipedia, but it looks like it was a lot more faithful to the poem. Whilst it's no surprise that there are multiple games based on a public domain property, it is interesting to note how many different directions developers can take a well-known story. Maybe they can take it in a Sims-style direction next, letting us manage the eternal lives of a group of damned souls. I mean, these ideas are literally just sitting there, developers. Come on, take them. Number 6. Prey, 2006 and 2017. Settle in, children, it's story time. In 2006, Human Head Studios and 2K Games released Prey, a first-person shooter about a Native American man doing battle with an invading alien species. The game had been in development for over a decade before its release, so you can imagine the team's delight when Prey sold over 1 million copies in its first 2 months. Work began on a direct sequel, but through a string of convoluted business decisions, the Prey trademark was transferred to Bethesda, who turned it into another drag racing game. I'm just kidding, but I had you for a moment, didn't I? No, 2017's Prey, or Prey 2 if you want to get serious about this, was still a sci-fi adventure, and better yet, it was a sci-fi adventure that brought the world the Millerism. It's a long and convoluted story, and I won't bore you with it now, but that is why I've been saying Prey like that all the way through this entry. So there you go, that's where that comes from, nice. This game was instead set in the near future, with humanity facing a threat from a hive-minded alien species on an ex-Soviet space station. How did we get from Native Americans to the Soviet Union? Honestly, your guess is as good as mine, but that, children, is why Prey should be called Prey 2, if you want to get serious about this. Number 5. Mega Man 3, 1990 and 1992. Mega Man 3 for the NES is still one of the most popular titles to feature the Blue Bomber, and it helped introduce new features to the series, including the DJ Casper-inspired slide mechanic. Sadly though, nobody had nice things to say about the PC game, also called Mega Man 3. Now, before you get angry at us for including a port on this list, it is important to note that whilst the game is licensed by Capcom, it was not a port. It was an entirely new game made by just one man. Former Capcom employee Steve Rosner somehow managed to get the company to let him make Mega Man games for PC after he left, but he had no official assets with which to do it. As a result, the 2 Mega Man games he made, yes, he only made 2 games despite one of them being called Mega Man 3, are pretty horrible and are often ranked among the worst PC games of all time. To give him credit, Rosner was working on this project without any support from Capcom whatsoever, but to take all that credit away from him again, he didn't have to do this, did he? He could have saved all of us a lot of pain. Number 4. Fable, 1996 and 2004. It may not be one of the best-selling franchises in gaming, and it might be associated with one of the industry's most controversial figures, but the Fable series is still huge and remains beloved by fans years after the first game was released. Peter Molyneux's original fantasy epic introduced the world to Albion, and laid the groundwork for its 2 sequels and various spin-offs, which are definitely not on rails. It shouldn't come as a surprise, though, that a title that could be a Wordle solution has been the name of multiple video games over the years. In 1996, a point-and-click adventure called Fable was released for PC. This title was similarly fantastical, with a protagonist sent on a quest to recover 4 magical gemstones. 1996's Fable is a pretty standard, light-hearted narrative until you get to the ending of the game, in which it's revealed that the main character is in jail for murdering his family? Bloody hell, that came out of nowhere. I guess this version really did go off the rails. I'm not really sure which is worse though, a game famous for its fibbing creator, or a game famous for a totally brutal ending. Maybe the name Fable is just cursed. That would be very fitting, to be fair. Number 3. Portal, 1986 and 2007. Considering how important the dialogue, graphics, and gameplay are to the success of classic puzzler Portal, you might be surprised to find out that the other major video game with that name is a text-based adventure. Released in 1986 for the Amiga, Portal is about an astronaut who's returned to Earth to find the human race has completely vanished. With the help of a computer named Homer, no, not that one, you attempt to piece together bits of information and find out what happened. Text adventures aren't for everyone, but this one got some pretty decent reviews at the time, and even spawned what's called a book, which is basically like a text adventure game, but it's all written on paper. They're fun, you should try them sometime. There were also plans to reboot the game as a third-person adventure title in 2012, but those plans fell through due to financial difficulties. As for the 2007 game named Portal, well, it's only one of the most beloved titles of all time, isn't it? It has some of the most fun and innovative puzzle mechanics in gaming, and an antagonist so iconic that she got her own musical number. But is anyone in the game named after a Simpsons character? No, didn't think so. Very disappointing, Valve. Number 2. Super Mario Bros. 2, 1986 and 1988. This one might be even more confusing than the other entries because, depending on who you ask, these 2 games don't always have the same name. Following the monstrous success of Super Mario Bros., Nintendo released a sequel in Japan under the name Super Mario Bros. 2, featuring new power-ups and a significant increase in difficulty. Nintendo of America decided not to publish the game, either because it was too difficult, so the story goes, or simply because the game wasn't very good, according to many sources. Either way, they took an entirely different game, Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, and branded that as Super Mario Bros. 2 instead. The American version was completely different from its Japanese counterpart as a result, but this didn't stop it from being one of the best received games for the NES. The Japanese version remained a lost curiosity for Western gamers until 1993, when it was released as part of Super Mario All-Stars under the name Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. But as if all that weren't confusing enough, there's also the 2012 release, New Super Mario Bros. 2, and the Commodore 64 version of the Game & Watch title, Mario Bros. 2. You know what? I think I need to lie down. I'm having a Doki Doki Panic of my own over here. And number 1, Sonic the Hedgehog, 1991 and 2006. The ballad of the 2006 game that's officially just called Sonic the Hedgehog but is known by other names is a very sad song. It's also a very annoying song, and one that's so bad people stampede to switch off the radio whenever they hear it. What was originally meant to be a celebration of Sonic's 15th anniversary ended up as a complete joke, known commonly as Sonic 06, with long loading times, poor camera angles, hideous voice acting, and copious glitches being just some of the many, many things wrong with it. The game was about as far as you could get from the original Sonic the Hedgehog, which is regarded as one of the best video games ever made. It was a near-perfect 2D platformer with great characters, level designs, and mechanics. It has more than earned its place as a classic, which makes it all the more painful that it shares its name with this monstrosity. Whilst fans may try to distance the newer title from the original by calling it Sonic 06, there's no escaping the fact that these games do indeed have the same name, and that the latter has forever cast an unwelcome shadow over the former. You know, I thought ending on a shadow pun could cheer me up after talking about this game, but no, actually. Sorry to report, I'm still feeling cold and dead inside.